The Range Rover was moving at over 100 kilometers per hour on the Dark Rift Valley Escarpment Road when Kwame's hand suddenly grabbed Amara's arm with violent force. The dashboard lights cast eerie shadows across his face, transforming her younger brother into someone she no longer recognized. "Sign the papers now, or I swear to God, Amara." His voice was raw with rage and desperation, nothing like the apologetic brother who had invited her for a reconciliation drive just hours ago. "Kwame, please. You're scaring me. Slow down." Amara's heart hammered against her chest as she watched the speedometer climb higher. The dark escarpment stretched endlessly before them, with deadly cliffs on one side and no other vehicles in sight. 500 million shillings. Amara, 500 million. And the old man gave you everything. Spit flew from his mouth as he screamed, one hand jerking the steering wheel erratically toward the cliff edge while the other gripped her shoulder with bruising force. It was Baba's decision. "I can't just—" Her words were cut short as Kwame suddenly reached across her body and yanked the passenger door handle. The door flew open, and the deafening roar of wind and the void beyond rushed into the car. "Then you can die with nothing." In one brutal motion, her own brother, the boy who used to protect her from bullies at school, who taught her to swim at Lake Nakuru, who promised to always have her back, slammed on the brakes and shoved her with all his strength. Amara's fingers clawed desperately at the leather seat, at the door frame, at anything that might save her. But physics and betrayal were merciless companions. Her body tumbled out of the speeding vehicle at nearly 100 kilometers per hour, and the last thing she saw was a red glow of brake lights disappearing around the curve as her brother drove away, leaving her broken body on the dark tarmac. The sound of her skull hitting the asphalt echoed like thunder before everything went black. Do you think she survived that push? Could anyone survive being thrown from a car at that speed on a dangerous escarpment road? Stay tuned to find out how one woman's fight for survival became Kenya's most shocking story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate justice. Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, share it with your friends, and most importantly turn on the notification bell so you can get informed when I drop another amazing story. Drop your thoughts and reactions in the comments. If someone in your family betrayed you this deeply for money, would you ever be able to forgive them? And what would you do if you discovered your sibling was planning to kill you for an inheritance? Let's dive into this incredible true story from Kenya. Amara Mwangi, 28 years old with sharp brown eyes and natural hair styled in an elegant updo, walked through the corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged. Employees nodded respectfully as she passed, knowing she was not just the boss's daughter, but capable executive who had earned her position through merit and dedication. "Good morning, Miss Mwangi," her assistant Grace called out as Amara approached her corner office. "Your father wants to see you in the boardroom at 10. The quarterly reports are ready for your review." Amara smiled, adjusting her tailored navy blazer. She had been working at her father's multinational corporation since graduating summa cum laude from the University of Cape Town Business School 5 years ago. What started as a junior analyst position had evolved into her current role as Chief Operations Officer, a title she had earned through countless late nights, innovative strategies, and an unwavering commitment to the company's success. Ezekiel Mwangi had built his empire from nothing, started with a small textile shop in Jakamba Market and expanding into a global conglomerate worth over $500 million. At 65, he was still sharp, still driven, but increasingly concerned about the future of his life's work. Amara had proven herself worthy of inheriting the business, showing the same dedication and integrity that had made him successful. The same could not be said for his son. 26-year-old Kwame Mwangi stumbled to the front gate of the family compound in Karen at 11 a.m., his expensive designer shirt wrinkled and reeking of changa and cheap perfume. His hair was disheveled, his bloodshot eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses, and his movements carried the unsteady gait of someone nursing a severe hangover. Bwana Kwame, the housekeeper, Mama and Jerry, greeted him with barely concealed disapproval. "Your father has been looking for you. He asked you to be at the office by 9 this morning." Kwame waved her off dismissively, heading straight for the stairs of the palatial house. "Tell the old man I'm sick or something. I need to sleep." But Mama and Jerry had worked for the Mwangi family for 15 years, and she knew Kwame's patterns all too well. Instead of covering for him, she would report his condition to Bwana Mwangi, as she had been instructed to do months ago when Kwame's behavior had become increasingly erratic. The truth was, Kwame had spent the night at an underground gambling den in Eastlands, losing another 2 million shillings that he didn't have. The money had come from his father's private safe, money he had stolen using the combination he had memorized years ago during one of his father's business calls. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Kwame had developed a gambling addiction that had cost the family millions of shillings over the past 2 years. While Amara was in the boardroom presenting innovative cost-saving measures that would increase company profits by 12%, Kwame was upstairs in his childhood bedroom, frantically calling his bookie to arrange an extension on his latest debt. The dangerous men he owed money to in Kale weren't known for their patience, and Kwame was running out of valuable items to steal from the family compound. That evening, Ezekiel Mwangi sat in his study reviewing financial reports when he noticed discrepancies in his personal accounts. Money had been disappearing in small amounts over months, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The private investigator he had hired had delivered a comprehensive report that afternoon, complete with photographs of Kwame entering illegal gambling dens in Kibera, receipts from expensive nightclubs in Westlands, and testimonies from women who had been paid with stolen money. The revelation hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. He had suspected Kwame's lifestyle was funded by more than his modest allowance, but seeing the evidence of systematic theft from his own son was devastating. The boy he had raised, educated at the finest schools in Kenya and abroad, and loved unconditionally, had been robbing him blind while his daughter worked tirelessly to build a family legacy. Ezekiel's hands trembled as he opened his laptop and began typing an email to his attorney. The will that currently left the business equally divided between his children would need to be changed immediately. Kwame's behavior had proved he couldn't be trusted with a duca, let alone a $500 million empire. As he worked on the legal documents, Ezekiel heard the familiar sound of Kwame's Range Rover pulling into the compound at 3 a.m. Through his study window, he watched his son stumble out of the car, clearly intoxicated, with a woman he didn't recognize. The sight filled him with disgust and profound sadness. The next morning, Ezekiel called both of his children to his office. Amara arrived promptly at 8 a.m., as always, while Kwame showed up an hour late, still wearing yesterday's clothes and reeking of alcohol. "I've made some decisions about the future of this company," Ezekiel began, his voice steady but filled with disappointment. "Amara, your dedication and competence have been exemplary. You've proven yourself worthy of leading Mwangi Industries into the next generation." Amara felt a mixture of pride and concern as she watched her father's expression grow stern while looking at Kwame. "Kwame," Ezekiel continued, "your behavior over the past few years has been unacceptable. The drinking, the gambling, the stealing from our family." He paused, watching his son's face pale. "Yes, I know about the money you've been taking from my safe. I know about your debts, your lifestyle, and your complete disregard for this family's reputation." Kwame shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his bloodshot eyes darting between his father and sister. "Baba, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Ezekiel interrupted. "I'm removing you from my will entirely. Amara will inherit everything. The company, the properties, all of it. You'll receive nothing unless you can prove you've changed, which seems unlikely given your current trajectory." The words hit Kwame like a panga to the chest. $500 million. Gone. His comfortable future, his financial security, his ability to pay off his mounting debts. All of it now belonged to his perfect sister. As Amara tried to process the magnitude of what her father had just announced, she didn't notice the dangerous glint that appeared in Kwame's eyes. She didn't see the way his hands clenched into fists or the calculating expression that replaced his usual drunken stupor. Kwame Mwangi had just lost everything, and in his twisted mind, there was only one person to blame. His sister had always been the favorite, always been the golden child, and now she had cost him his inheritance. But Kwame wasn't going to accept this decision quietly. He was going to fight for what he believed was rightfully his, and he didn't care who got hurt in the process. The war for the Mwangi fortune had begun, and Amara had no idea how far her brother was willing to go to claim it. Can you believe a brother could be this selfish and dangerous? What would you do if you discovered your sibling was stealing from your family? Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this story is about to take the most shocking turn you've ever seen. Don't miss what happens when greed turns deadly. 3 weeks after the devastating meeting in their father's office, the tension in the Mwangi household had reached a breaking point. Amara threw herself deeper into her work, knowing that she would soon be shouldering the full responsibility of the company. She spent her days restructuring departments, meeting with key clients across East Africa, and preparing for the massive transition ahead. Meanwhile, Kwame had disappeared into Nairobi's underground world completely. His gambling debts had ballooned over 15 million shillings, and the kind of people he owed money to in Mathar weren't the type to accept IOUs indefinitely. Desperate and increasingly paranoid, he had been staying in cheap lodgings in River Road and seedy apartments in Eastlands, avoiding both his creditors and his family. But Kwame wasn't just hiding. He was planning. Late one evening, as Amara worked in her home office in their Karen compound, reviewing acquisition proposals, her phone rang. It was Kwame, and his voice carried an urgency she hadn't heard in years. "Amara, I need to talk to you," he said, using her full name instead of the childhood nickname Mara he usually preferred. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what Baba said, and you're right. I need help." Amara set down her pen, surprised by what sounded like genuine remorse in her brother's voice. Despite everything he had done, despite the theft and the lies, a part of her still loved the boy who had helped her catch grasshoppers in their grandmother's shamba when they were children. "Kwame, I'm glad you're ready to get help. Baba would be so relieved to hear." "No," Kwame interrupted quickly. "I can't face him yet. I need to prove I've changed first. But I want to make things right with you. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's something important I need to tell you about Baba's business. Something he doesn't know about." Amara hesitated. Something in Kwame's tone didn't feel quite right, but the possibility of reconciling with her brother was too important to ignore. "What kind of something?" "I can't discuss it over the phone. It's about the Mombasa port deal. There are some irregularities that could expose the company to serious liability. Meet me tomorrow evening, and I'll explain everything. We can drive up to the Rift Valley house and talk privately." The Mombasa port acquisition was indeed a sensitive matter that Amara had been handling personally. If there were problems she wasn't aware of, it could jeopardize the entire deal. Against her better judgment, she agreed to meet him. What Amara didn't know was that Kwame had spent the past 3 weeks researching the most isolated routes to their family's vacation house near Lake Nakuru. He had studied traffic patterns, identified the most dangerous curves along the escarpment road, and planned every detail of what he intended to do. The next evening, Amara met Kwame at a petrol station on Waiyaki Way. He appeared more sober and composed than she had seen him in months, which was actually the result of careful planning rather than genuine recovery. He had forced himself to stay clean for 48 hours to ensure his reflexes were sharp for what he had planned. "Thanks for coming, Mara," he said, embracing her with what seemed like genuine affection. "I know I don't deserve your trust after everything I've done." As they drove toward the Rift Valley in Kwame's Range Rover, Amara felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps their father's ultimatum had been the wake-up call Kwame needed. Perhaps there was still hope for their family to heal. "So tell me about these irregularities in the Mombasa deal," she said as they wound through the escarpment roads. Kwame's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Actually, Mara, there's something else I need to discuss with you first. Something about Baba's will." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. The earnest, apologetic tone in Kwame's voice had shifted to something colder, more calculated. "What about the will?" "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. 500 million shillings that should rightfully be split between us. 500 million shillings that you convinced Baba to give only to you." "Kwame, I didn't convince Baba of anything. Your behavior." "My behavior?" Kwame's voice rose dangerously. "My behavior was just living my life, having some fun. But you've been poisoning him against me for years, playing the perfect daughter, making me look bad by comparison." Amara realized with growing alarm that they were now on one of the most dangerous stretches of the escarpment road. The tarmac curved sharply along steep cliffs, with minimal guardrails and a drop of several hundred meters to the valley floor below. Kwame, slow down. You're driving too fast for these curves. Instead, Kwame pressed harder on the accelerator. The Range Rover's engine roared as they took the turns at increasingly dangerous speeds. You know what I realized, Mara? As long as you're alive, I'll never see a shilling of Baba's money. The will makes you the sole beneficiary, which means I get nothing. But if something were to happen to you, he let the implication hang in the air. Amara's blood turned to ice as she understood the true purpose of this drive. Kwame, you're talking about murder. Your own sister. I'm talking about justice, Kwame snarled. That money should be mine too. Baba built that company for both of us, not just his precious princess. As they approached one of the sharpest curves on the escarpment road, Kwame made his move. In one swift motion, he reached across the console and grabbed the passenger door handle, pulling it open while simultaneously slamming on the brakes. Sorry, Mara. Nothing personal. The combination of the sudden deceleration and the open door sent Amara tumbling out of the car at nearly 100 kilometers per hour. She hit the tarmac hard, her body rolling and bouncing along the rough surface before sliding toward the edge of the cliff. Kwame watched in his side mirror as his sister's body came to rest just meters from the precipice. For a moment, he thought she might be dead, which would solve his problem perfectly. But then he saw her move, saw her struggle to push herself up on her elbows. Cursing in Kikuyu, Kwame threw the car in reverse, intending to finish what he had started. But the sound of approaching headlights made him reconsider. Another vehicle was coming around the bend, and he couldn't risk being seen at the scene. Instead, he drove away, leaving Amara broken and bleeding on the escarpment road, assuming that exposure and her injuries would complete the job he had started. But Kwame had made a critical error. Amara Mwangi was stronger than he had ever given her credit for, and she was about to prove that surviving attempted murder was only the beginning of her story. As she lay on the cold tarmac, feeling her strength ebbing away, Amara made a silent promise to herself. If she survived this night, she would make sure her brother paid for what he had done, not just to her, but to their father, their family, and everyone else's selfishness had hurt. The war for the Mwangi fortune had escalated to attempted murder, but Amara was far from defeated. This is absolutely insane. How can someone try to kill their own sister for money? What do you think Amara should do if she survives? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe because the next chapter will reveal whether she lives or dies and what her revenge plan will be. Amara's eyes fluttered open to the sterile white ceiling of Nairobi Hospital's intensive care unit. Every inch of her body screamed in agony. 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, severe road rash covering her left side, and a concussion that made the fluorescent lights feel like spears piercing her skull. But she was alive, and that fact alone filled her with a burning determination for justice. The first face she saw was that of Inspector Grace Wanjiku, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying temples who specialized in domestic violence cases for the Kenya Police Service. Miss Mwangi, I'm Inspector Wanjiku. You've been unconscious for 18 hours. Do you remember what happened? Amara's throat was raw, but her voice was steady as she recounted the events on the escarpment road. She watched Inspector Wanjiku's expression grow increasingly grim as she described Kwame's confession, his attempt to push her from a moving car, and his clear intention to murder her for the inheritance. Your brother reported you missing last night, Inspector Wanjiku said, making notes in Kiswahili. He claimed you never showed up for your meeting and that he was worried about your safety. He's been playing concerned brother role perfectly. Of course he has, Amara whispered. Kwame has always been good at lying. Meanwhile, at Mwangi Industries headquarters in Westlands, Ezekiel Mwangi was pacing his office like a caged lion. The phone call from the hospital had shattered his world. His daughter, his pride and joy, had been found broken and bleeding on an escarpment road. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. But what destroyed him more than Amara's physical injuries was learning the truth about how she had gotten them. His son, his own flesh and blood, had attempted to murder his sister for money. Ezekiel's hands shook as he opened his safe and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were all the documents he'd been gathering over the past month. Evidence of Kwame's theft his gambling debts, his associations with dangerous criminals in Eastlands, and now attempted murder. It was time to take action that went far beyond simply changing his will. At the same time, Kwame was in a rundown lodging in River Road, frantically making phone calls. His plan had failed, and now he was in serious trouble. Amara was alive, conscious, and undoubtedly telling the police everything. He needed to disappear, and he needed money to do it. "Listen to me carefully," he said into his phone to Jomo, Mkono Wadabu Karaoke, his primary bookie and a man with connections to Nairobi's criminal underworld. "I need that loan we discussed. 500,000 shillings today. You're already into me for 15 million, Njinga." Jomo's gravelly voice responded. "What makes you think I'm giving you more rope to hang yourself with?" "Because my father's about to have a very unfortunate accident," Kwame said, his voice cold with calculation. "And when he does, I'll inherit 500 million shillings. You'll get your money with interest." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of accident?" Kwame had been planning this contingency for weeks. If his attempt to eliminate Amara had succeeded, he would have inherited everything automatically. But now he needed a different approach, one that would remove both obstacles to his inheritance. "The kind that happens to old men who drive alone on dangerous escarpment roads," Kwame replied, "especially when their brakes mysteriously fail." 2 days later, Ezekiel Mwangi received a phone call that changed everything. It was from his longtime family attorney, Mwala Mugithi, with news that made his blood run cold. "Ezekiel, I've received some disturbing information from the police," Githi said. "They've been investigating Kwame's financial activities as part of Amara's case, and they've uncovered something shocking. Your son has been in contact with some very dangerous people in Eastlands, people who specialize in making problems disappear permanently." Ezekiel felt his chest tighten. "What are you saying, Mwalamu?" "I'm saying that Amara's accident might not have been Kwame's only plan. The police believe he may be planning something similar for you. They want to put you under police protection immediately." But Ezekiel Mwangi had not built a 500 million shilling empire by running from problems. Instead, he made a decision that would prove fatal. He would confront his son directly, face to face, and force him to confess to what he had done to Amara. The next evening, Ezekiel drove alone to the family house near Lake Nakuru, where they had spent countless happy holidays. He had called Kwame and arranged to meet him there, claiming he wanted to discuss a possible reconciliation. What Ezekiel didn't know was that Kwame had spent the previous day working on his father's Mercedes, loosening brake lines and tampering with the steering mechanism. The confrontation at the lake house was brief but explosive. Ezekiel accused Kwame of attempting to murder Amara, and Kwame didn't bother denying it. "She had it coming," Kwame said with chilling calmness. "And so do you, old man. You want to cut me out of my inheritance? Fine, I'll just accelerate the timeline." Ezekiel stared at his son in horror, finally seeing the monster that his boy had become. "Kwame, you need help. Serious psychiatric help. But first, you're going to turn yourself into the police and confess to what you did to your sister." Kwame laughed bitterly. "I'm not confessing to anything. And neither are you." As Ezekiel turned to leave, intending to drive straight to the nearest police station, Kwame made his final move. He had positioned himself between his father and the landline phone, and the mobile network coverage at the lake house was notoriously poor. Ezekiel would have to drive back to Nakuru town to contact the authorities, but Kwame had ensured that drive would be his last. The brake failure occurred on the same treacherous stretch of escarpment road where Amara had nearly died. Ezekiel's Mercedes crashed through the guardrail and plunged into the valley below, exploding in a fireball that could be seen from Nakuru town. Kwame, who had been followed at a safe distance, pulled over and called the emergency services, playing the role of the devastated son who had witnessed his father's tragic accident. By the time the emergency responders arrived, Kwame was sobbing convincingly over the loss of his beloved father. But Kwame had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance and desperation, he had underestimated both the police investigation and his sister's determination to expose the truth. 3 days after Ezekiel Mwangi's funeral at All Saints Cathedral, Inspector Wanjiku sat in Amara's hospital room with news that would change everything. "We found evidence of tampering with your father's car," she said quietly. "Brake lines cut, Steering mechanism damaged. This wasn't an accident, Miss Mwangi. This was murder. Amara closed her eyes, feeling a rage so pure and powerful that it seemed to burn away the pain from her injuries. Kwame had killed her father. Her brother had murdered a man who had given him everything, simply because he refused to give him more. "There's something else," Inspector Wanjiku continued. "We've been monitoring your brother's communications since your incident. He's been in contact with some very dangerous people in Eastlands, and we have recordings of him discussing both attacks, yours and your father's." Amara opened her eyes, and Inspector Wanjiku was struck by the steel she saw there. This was no longer the broken woman who had been pushed from a moving car. This was someone who had been forged in fire and emerged stronger than ever. "What do you need from me?" Amara asked. "We need you to help us catch him in the act. He's planning to claim his inheritance, but he doesn't know that your father changed the will again after your attack. He left everything to the Mwangi Foundation, specifically because he suspected Kwame might try something like this." Amara smiled for the first time since the attack. It was a smile that would have terrified her brother if he could have seen it. "Inspector Wanjiku," she said quietly, "I think it's time my brother learned that the Mwangi family doesn't go down without a fight. The trap was about to be set, and Kwame Mwangi was walking straight into it. The father is dead, and now it's war. How will Amara get her revenge on the brother who destroyed their family? The next chapter will blow your mind with the most epic takedown you've ever seen. Smash that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to get intense." Amara's discharge from Nairobi Hospital 2 weeks later was carefully orchestrated theater. Inspector Wanjiku had convinced the doctors to announce publicly that Amara was suffering from severe memory loss due to her head trauma, and that she had no recollection of the events leading up to her accident. The story was leaked to the Daily Nation and quickly spread through Nairobi's business community. Kwame read the news with barely contained glee. If Amara couldn't remember what had happened on the escarpment road, she couldn't testify against him. Even better, if she was suffering from cognitive impairment, he might be able to have her declared mentally incompetent and claim guardianship over the estate. His father's death had made him the sole surviving child, and with Amara incapacitated, the inheritance would be his by default. What Kwame didn't know was that Amara was not only fully recovered mentally, but she was now working closely with the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. Her father's death had elevated the case from attempted murder to a complex investigation involving insurance fraud, inheritance manipulation, and connections to organized crime in Eastlands. The evidence against Kwame was overwhelming, but the authorities wanted more than just his conviction. They wanted to dismantle the entire network of criminals he had been working with. Jomo Mkono Wadahabu and his associates had been facilitating similar inheritance scams across East Africa for years, and Kwame's case was a key to bringing down the entire operation. Amara had agreed to wear a recording device and play the role of the confused, vulnerable sister while Kwame attempted to manipulate her into signing over her rights to the estate. It was dangerous. If Kwame discovered a deception, there was no telling how he might react. But Amara was determined to see justice done, not just for herself, but for her father and all the other victims of Kwame's greed. The first meeting was arranged at the Mwangi compound in Karen, now eerily quiet without Ezekiel's presence. Amara arrived early, accompanied by a team of DCI officers posing as medical staff and legal advisors. Hidden cameras and microphones had been installed throughout the house, ensuring that every word of Kwame's confession would be recorded. Kwame arrived precisely on time, bringing with him a briefcase full of legal documents and performance worthy of a Kalasha Award. He embraced Amara with what appeared to be genuine affection, expressing his relief that she was recovering and his devastation over their father's death. "I'm so sorry about everything that's happened, Mara," he said, using the childhood nickname with practiced emotion. "Losing Baba has been devastating, and seeing you hurt like this, I should have been there to protect you." Amara played her part perfectly, allowing confusion and fragility to color her voice. "I still can't remember much about that night. The doctors say the memories might never come back." "Maybe that's for the best," Kwame said quickly. "Some things are better left forgotten." As they sat in their father's study, surrounded by the books and business awards that represented Ezekiel's lifetime of achievement, Kwame began to reveal his true nature. He started slowly, suggesting that Amara was in no condition to handle the stress of running the company, that she needed someone to help her manage her affairs. "I've been talking to some lawyers in Nairobi," he said, pulling documents from his briefcase. "There are ways to structure the inheritance that would be better for your health. You could sign over the business operations to me temporarily, just until you're feeling better." Amara pretended to study the papers with the concentration of someone struggling to understand complex concepts. "I don't know Kwame. Baba always said I should never sign anything without having Mwalimu Githi review it first." Githi is old school. Kwame dismissed their father's attorney with a wave. These new lawyers specialize in situations like this. They understand the medical implications of head trauma on business decision-making. As the conversation continued, Kwame became increasingly aggressive in his manipulation. He painted pictures of Amara collapsing under the stress of running the company, suggested that their father had been planning to step down anyway, and hinted that he had always been meant to take over the business eventually. But it was when Amara mentioned the police investigation into their father's death that Kwame truly revealed his sociopathic nature. "The police think Baba's death might not have been an accident," Amara said, watching Kwame's reaction carefully. For just a moment, his mask slipped. A cold, calculating expression crossed his face before he quickly replaced it with concern. "That's ridiculous. Baba was getting older. His reflexes weren't what they used to be. Escarpment roads are dangerous, especially at night. But they found evidence that his brakes had been tampered with." Kwame's laugh was too quick, too forced. "Mara, you're not thinking clearly. The trauma from your own accident is making you paranoid. Baba's car was old. Things break down. The police are just looking for someone to blame because they can't accept that sometimes bad things just happen. Like what happened to me on the escarpment road?" The question hung in the air like a loaded AK-47. Kwame's eyes narrowed slightly, and Amara could see him calculating, wondering how much she actually remembered. "You fell out of a moving car, Mara. It was a terrible accident, but that's all it was, an accident." Amara nodded slowly, as if accepting his explanation, but the recording device she was wearing captured the subtle thread in his voice, the way he emphasized the word accident, as if daring her to challenge his version of events. Over the next week, Amara met with Kwame 3 more times, each conversation recorded, and each session revealing more of his guilt. He spoke casually about their father's accident, made increasingly bold attempts to convince Amara to sign over her inheritance, and eventually began making veiled threats about what might happen if she didn't cooperate. The breakthrough came during their 4th meeting, when Kwame brought Jomo Mkono wa Dahabu with him. The bookie was there ostensibly to help Amara understand some complex financial documents, but his presence was actually Kwame's way of intimidating her into compliance. "Miss Mwangi," Jomo said in his gravelly voice, "your brother's been telling me about your memory problems. That's a real shame. Memory is important in business. People who can't remember things sometimes make bad decisions, if you know what I mean." The threat was unmistakable, and it was exactly what the DCI had been waiting for. They now had evidence of conspiracy, intimidation, and racketeering to add to the murder charges. But Amara wasn't finished. She had one more card to play. "You know," she said slowly, as if a memory was surfacing, "I've been having dreams about that night on the escarpment. Fragments of things that happened. Dr. Mwangi says they might be my real memories trying to come back." Kwame went very still. "What kind of dreams?" "Dreams about being pushed. Dreams about someone grabbing the door handle and pulling it open while the car was moving. Dreams about a voice saying, 'Sorry, Mara.' Nothing personal." The blood drained from Kwame's face. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of Jomo's heavy breathing. Then Kwame did exactly what Amara and the DCI had hoped he would do. He confessed. "You can't prove anything," he said, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "Even if you remember, who's going to believe you? You were traumatized, confused, and even if they did believe you, so what? Baba's dead, and you're about to join him if you don't stop this nonsense right now." The confession was perfect, clear, and completely incriminating. Kwame had just admitted to attempted murder and threatened to finish the job, all while being recorded by DCI officers. Amara smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it was a genuine smile filled with satisfaction and justice. "You're right about one thing, Kwame," she said, her voice suddenly clear and strong, no longer playing the role of the confused victim. "I can't prove what you did on that escarpment road." Kwame looked confused by the sudden change in her demeanor. "But I don't have to," Amara continued, "because you just confessed to everything on DCI recording equipment." The front door burst open as DCI officers flooded into the compound. Kwame and Jomo were on the ground in handcuffs before they could even process what was happening. As Inspector Wanjiku read Kwame's rights in both English and Kiswahili, Amara stood over her brother with an expression of cold satisfaction. "You always underestimated me, Kwame," she said quietly. "But you made one fatal mistake. You forgot that I'm Ezekiel Mwangi's daughter, and we don't lose family fights." Kwame looked up at her with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "You set me up." "No," Amara corrected him. "I gave you enough rope to hang yourself. You did all the rest." As the officers led Kwame away in handcuffs, Amara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The brother who had tried to kill her was finally going to face justice. But more importantly, her father's murder would not go unavenged. The Mwangi family war was over, and Amara had won decisively. Boom! She got him. Did you see how perfectly she planned that trap? This is what happens when you mess with a smart woman. What's your favorite part of her revenge plan? Drop in the comments and hit that subscribe button, because the final chapter is going to show you exactly what happens to this evil brother in court. The trial of Kwame Mwangi became the most sensational criminal case Nairobi had seen in decades. The prosecution, led by Director of Public Prosecutions Keriako Tabiko, presented a devastating case that laid bare the full scope of Kwame's crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings of his confessions, physical evidence of sabotage on Ezekiel Mwangi's vehicle, testimony from Jomo Mkono wa Dahabu, who had quickly agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, and Amara's powerful testimony about the night her brother tried to murder her. For 3 weeks, the Milimani law courts were packed with reporters, business leaders, and curious members of the public who came to witness the downfall of one of Kenya's most prominent families. Amara attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row where Kwame could see her, a constant reminder of his failure to eliminate the witness to his crimes. The defense attorney, a high-priced lawyer named Mwalimu Karanja whom Kwame had hired with the last of his stolen money, tried desperately to paint his client as a victim of gambling addiction and family pressure. He argued that Kwame's crimes were the result of mental illness and desperation, not calculated evil. But the prosecution's case was airtight. Dr. Catherine N. George, a forensic psychiatrist from Mathar Hospital, testified that while Kwame showed signs of antisocial personality disorder, he was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. The evidence showed careful planning, deliberate manipulation, and a complete lack of remorse for his crimes. The most damaging testimony came from Kwame himself. Against his attorney's advice, he took the stand in his own defense, apparently believing he could charm the jury just as he had charmed his way out of trouble his entire life. Instead, he came across as arrogant, self-serving, and completely unrepentant. When asked about pushing his sister from a moving car, Kwame showed no emotion. "I was desperate," he said flatly in Kiswahili. "She had taken everything that should have been mine. I wasn't thinking clearly." "So you decided to murder her?" DPP Tabiko pressed. "I wasn't trying to murder anyone. I just wanted her out of the way, so I could claim what was rightfully mine." The cold calculation in his voice horrified the jury. This wasn't a man who had acted in a moment of passion or mental breakdown. This was someone who had methodically planned to eliminate anyone who stood between him and 500 million shillings. When asked about his father's death, Kwame was equally chilling. "My father was going to leave everything to charity out of spite. He was an old man who couldn't accept that his children had lives of their own. His death was unfortunate, but it solved the problem." Even his own defense attorney looked disgusted by his client's testimony. Amara's testimony was the emotional high point of the trial. She spoke clearly and calmly about the night Kwame tried to kill her, describing in detail how her own brother had confessed his plan before pushing her from the car. She talked about lying on that escarpment road, feeling her life ebbing away, while the brother she had loved despite everything drove away assuming she would die. But it was when she spoke about their father that the courtroom fell completely silent. Ezekiel Mwangi was a good man who worked his entire life to build something meaningful, she said, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. He loved both of his children, even when one of them was stealing from him, lying to him, and ultimately planning to murder him. My father died because he refused to enable Kwame's destructive behavior, and because he tried to protect the company he had built for future generations. She turned to look directly at Kwame, who was staring at the defense table, unable to meet her eyes. Kwame didn't just kill our father. He destroyed our family, betrayed everyone who ever loved him, and murdered a man whose only crime was expecting his son to take responsibility for his actions. He doesn't deserve forgiveness, and he certainly doesn't deserve freedom. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered verdicts that would echo through Nairobi's legal community for years to come. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Ezekiel Mwangi, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted murder in the attack on Amara Mwangi, we find the defendant guilty. On the charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and fraud, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. Kwame showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, as if he couldn't comprehend that his carefully laid plans had resulted in multiple life sentences. Judge Catherine Murigi, a stern woman in her 60s who presided over countless criminal cases, addressed Kwame directly before sentencing. Mr. Mwangi, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such calculated cruelty within a family. You murdered your father, a man who gave you every advantage in life, simply because he refused to enable your destructive behavior. You attempted to murder your sister, someone who loved you despite your many failings, because she stood between you and money you had done nothing to earn. Judge Murigi paused, letting her words sink in. Your crimes were not committed in a moment of passion or desperation. They were planned, methodical, and carried out with complete disregard for human life. You have shown no remorse, no understanding of the magnitude of your actions, and no indication that you are capable of rehabilitation. The courtroom was silent as she delivered the sentence that would define the rest of Kwame Mwangi's life. For the murder of Ezekiel Mwangi, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the attempted murder of Amara Mwangi, I sentence you to an additional 25 years to life. For conspiracy and racketeering charges, an additional 10 years. These sentences will run consecutively, ensuring that you will never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people. Kwame was led away in shackles, his expensive suit and arrogant demeanor replaced by the orange jumpsuit and defeated posture of a convicted murderer. As the prison officers escorted him from the courtroom, he turned once to look at Amara. The hatred in his eyes was unmistakable, but so was the knowledge that he had lost everything. Amara felt a profound sense of closure as she watched her brother disappear to the courtroom doors. Justice had been served, not just for her and her father, but for all the victims of Kwame's greed and violence. 6 months after the trial, Amara stood in the boardroom of Mwangi Industries, looking out the Nairobi skyline that her father had loved so much. The company had not only survived the scandal of Kwame's crimes, but had thrived under her leadership. She had implemented new charitable initiatives, expanded into renewable energy across East Africa, and honored her father's legacy by building something that would benefit society for generations to come. The 500 million shilling inheritance that Kwame had killed for was being put to work in ways he never could have imagined. Amara had established the Ezekiel Mwangi Foundation, which provided scholarships for underprivileged students at University of Nairobi, funded addiction treatment programs in Mathar, and supported victims of domestic violence across Kenya. It was exactly what her father would have wanted, his life's work being used to make the world a better place. Inspector Wanjiku stopped by Amara's office that afternoon with news about the broader investigation that had grown out of Kwame's case. Jomo Mkono Wadahabu's cooperation led us to a network of inheritance scams across East Africa, she reported. We've arrested 12 additional suspects and recovered over 50 million shillings in stolen assets. Your brother's case was the key that unlocked everything. Amara nodded, satisfied that some good had come from the tragedy. What about Kwame? How is he adjusting to prison life? Inspector Wanjika's expression grew grim. Not well. He's been placed in protective custody at Kamatai Maximum Prison after receiving death threats from other inmates. Apparently, even convicted killers don't appreciate someone who murders their own family for money. Amara felt no satisfaction in hearing about Kwame's suffering. The brother she had once loved was gone, replaced by a monster who destroyed everything he touched. But she also felt no sympathy for the consequences of his choices. As Inspector Wanjiku prepared to leave, she turned back with one final observation. You know, in all my years investigating family crimes, I've never seen anyone handle this kind of betrayal with such strength and grace. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become. After Inspector Wanjika left, Amara returned to her father's desk, now her desk, and opened the bottom drawer, where she kept a framed photograph of her family from happier times. It showed her, Kwame, and their father at Lake Nakuru during a holiday years earlier. They all looked so happy, so innocent of the tragedy that would eventually tear them apart. Amara traced her finger over her father's smiling face, remembering his wisdom, his integrity, and his unwavering belief that success meant nothing without honor. She had honored his memory not through revenge, but through justice. She had built something meaningful from the ashes of their family's destruction. The phone on her desk buzzed with a call from her assistant. Miss Mwangi, the board of directors is ready for the quarterly meeting. Amara stood, straightened her blazer, and prepared to face the future that her father had entrusted to her. The Mwangi name would survive and thrive, not because of the 500 million shillings that Kwame had killed for, but because of the values and principles that Ezekiel Mwangi had instilled in his daughter. As she walked toward the boardroom, Amara felt her father's presence with her, guiding her steps and blessing her choices. Kwame had thought that money was power, that inheritance was everything. But he had been wrong about the most important thing of all. The real inheritance wasn't the company or the money. It was a character, integrity, and strength that Ezekiel Mwangi had passed down to his daughter. And that inheritance could never be stolen, never be taken by force, and never be destroyed by greed. Amara Mwangi had won more than just a legal victory over her brother. She had proven that good ultimately triumphs over evil, that justice prevails over greed, and that love is stronger than hatred. The 500 million shillings that Kwame had killed for would now be used to honor their father's memory and help others for generations to come. And Kwame Mwangi would spend the rest of his life in a small cell at Kamatai Maximum Prison, with nothing but his guilt and regret for company. In the end, the inheritance had gone exactly where it belonged, to someone who understood that true wealth comes not from what you take, but from what you give. Wow! What an incredible journey from betrayal to justice. Amara turned her tragedy into triumph and made sure her evil brother got exactly what he deserved. What's the most shocking part of this whole story for you? Let us know in the comments below. If you love this amazing story of justice and revenge, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss our incredible true stories. Share this video with everyone who needs to see that karma is real and justice always wins in the end. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next unbelievable story.